You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one-on-one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1084. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. Last week was Level Up Week, and a ton of you came out for those webinars. We had 16 of them. We had panels, webinars, experts, all sorts of people. And then actually today, things wrap up with joining our membership community. So all week, we've been talking with people that are interested in joining the memberships. Again, we have Next Level Practice, which is our community for solo practitioners. We have Group Practice Launch, which is for people that are going from solo into group, and then Group Practice Boss. And as a bonus for all the Group Practice Launch and Group Practice Boss people that level up, we're actually giving a free ticket to the Group Practice Boss Conference that's going to be here in Traverse City, Michigan in May 2025. So it's going to be like a TEDx style, so shorter, really focused talks, and then lots of time to connect with people. Because I don't know about you, but when I go to conferences, the most value I usually get isn't when I'm sitting in a session. It's usually the conversations between things. So we're going to make sure that you have lots of time to hang out with people that are leveling up just like you. So again, that Group Practice Boss Conference, you get a free ticket to that when you level up. So head on over to practicethepractice.com/level up. Today, again, doors are closing for all of our membership communities. Well, I am so excited. Today, we have Dr. Michael Neal, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Build My Team. He is a practicing optometrist in private practice in Pennsylvania, and he founded Build My Team to solve his own hiring struggles in his practice by modeling how companies like Disney and Four Seasons hire. The process worked so well, he expanded it to help all his friends, and now Build My Team services clients in 8 different healthcare professions in over 40 states and Canada. And in his downtime, he's a dad to 2 great sons, runs marathons with his wife, and is an aspiring ultra runner. Mike, welcome to the Practice of Practice podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe. Really excited to be here today.
Yeah, I always love when there's people that have started to outsource and move beyond their own time. I think that when it comes to medicine and counseling, we're taught how to do the clinical side really well, but just the business side, we're rarely taught anything. So really glad to have you on the show today.
Oh, same. Thanks so much.
Well, let's go back to when did you realize there was a problem and you had to start hiring? Like, what was going on in your practice?
Well, the problem was just never ending. We were trying to hire people by using resumes, and we would one hire after another, just seemingly hire the wrong people over and over and over again. And what ended up happening is, as you mentioned during the intro, we took a look at, like, why is this happening? What the heck is causing this to occur? The folks involved in this process were reasonably smart people. We've got obviously a lot of experience with the hiring side of things. What's going on? And what we determined is we took a look at the Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton, some other companies like Disney, and how they're doing their hiring, because those companies are absolutely top of the heap when it comes to the customer experience they provide. And so kind of reverse engineered the process. And what we found out, Joe, right off the bat, was that they were not using resumes for hiring in the same way that we were. They would take all of their applicants and they would have them run through an assessment process to determine what the applicant's natural strengths and talents are. And so we took a look at how they did that, tried to copy it. It didn't work. We had to make our own and customize this entire process. And now we're at the point where we can, with approximately 97% certainty, we can bring a person into a practice for non-licensed roles, and they will work out tremendously well. It's essentially a method by which we bring A players and B plus players to the table, and it works so well it's guaranteed.
Mm, that's amazing. Now, what were some of your first hires for yourself when you started
Mm-hmm.
doing this process?
Well, it all started from a cell phone, believe it or not, my cell phone. And so, boy, that was something else. Awful time. If you ever want to go deep down an interesting rabbit hole, try contacting random job applicants via your own cell phone. It's but it started out like that, and then that grew to some doing it for friends, and that grew to automation, and now we are in 10 different healthcare professions throughout North America.
Wow. Now, when you started outsourcing, when you started having other people work on things in your practice, um, tell me a little bit about the first kind of hires you were making. What did that look like, and what did that free up for you to do more of?
Yeah. Well, at the time this started happening, that was my wife who was the almost entirely the sole doctor in the practice. And so the first person was a receptionist. Then uh, uh, a couple technicians, things like that. We brought in a biller slash office manager, and just kind of grew the team in a very traditional way, essentially. And that's now at the point where we have team members who specialize in each of their positions. And like in all things in healthcare, Joe, there's so much overlap. So you have a team member that is a terrific, let's say, front desk person, but they will also need to know, a secondary role when times are a little bit slow in the practice.
Yeah, and how are you discovering kind of those extra skills that people have?
Well, it's all through the build my team process. Our software is the process is essentially set up so that, let's say one of your listeners wants a secretary or a biller or any of those types of positions. They call up our team and have a consultation call with them. It's free, of course, and find out exactly what they're looking for. And then our team will write the job description. It's published to over 20 different job boards. So we get a ton of applicants. And I think that's one of the big keys here, Joe, is that um, if you're not getting a whole bunch of applicants, it makes this a very difficult process. And so they go through essentially, imagine a great big funnel. That's basically what it is. We pour as many applicants into the top of the funnel as possible, and through um, our texting system, the candidates, as soon as they apply for a job, within 5 seconds, they get a text from our software. And that's where they start the process of going through the assessments. It's very quick, and it'll tell us what their natural strengths and talents are. And that's so automated that in our process, the people who meet the natural strengths and talents for the position get a thumbs up. That's it, a thumbs up. And that's how we know to move them to the next level.
They have to shift when they're thinking
Mm-hmm.
about their process of figuring out what they want to outsource, and then how they need to be looking for new team members, whether or not they work with you. Um, who like what should they be doing to walk through that process?
The main thing that we see um, is that once you bring on people on your team that have the natural strengths and talents for the position, they're able to perform at a completely different level than what you're used to. So this goes counter to the model of bringing on experienced people. Just because they're experienced, it doesn't mean that they are naturally good at the position. It means simply that they've done it before. And when you have people with natural strengths and talents in the position, you don't have to undo any of the bad habits or any of those types of things that are essentially causing all kinds of problems for the practice. Now, on the other hand, when you have a person who has the natural strengths and talents, they just roll into work every day and they perform at an extremely high level. They don't even think anything's odd or different about it, Joe. It's just what they do. They're in a position where you are asking them to be themselves. And guess what they do all day
Mm.
long? They're themselves. And when they're themselves, they can perform at a much higher level. And that flies in the face of the traditional approach with experience.
I love that idea of like not trying to put people into roles where they can't be themselves. So that did you discover that kind of through trial and error? Like you had some bad hires, or did that just kind of naturally kind of come about in the process of starting to create a stronger team around yourself?
Well, I'd like to be able to take credit for all of that, but the fact of the matter is the companies that we studied, like Disney, the Four Seasons, and such, that's how they did it. And
Mm.
once you see how incredible, I mean, let's face it, anybody who's been to Disney will echo this right back in their head as they're listening to it. They provide an incredible experience. I mean, it's all about the
Mm-hmm.
experience. And their cast members are brought on for these strengths and talents. So, you know what they've been able to do is get people to not have to act, right? So if they're out there in Disney World under the who knows how hot it is at Disney World nowadays. Um, they're out there, they're essentially performing, but they're not acting. They're just being themselves. And when they do that, they're authentically and genuinely happy people, right? Versus essentially playing a role of some sort and at some level. And when you are your authentic self, when you are genuinely happy in in a job, boy oh boy does it ever show through.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you guys have created your whole kind of assessment model, which sounds really awesome. Are there
Mm-hmm.
other assessments out there that you found that are helpful in kind of pulling out those strengths, those natural inclinations that will help people with hiring?
There are, and I'm always cautious about this because what we found in designing this process is there wasn't one test, one assessment that works for everything. I wish. I mean, I flat out wish there was. But what you're looking for essentially is a symphony of one instrument. Okay.
Mm.
Imagine you have an instrument that could play all the different sounds of a symphony and an orchestra, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that doesn't exist. So what we did was we created um, the process, and it took a couple of instruments. And then when this is all said and done, you actually have music, and it's fantastic. And it does what it's supposed to do. It sounds great, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, we were never able to find the magic bullet assessment that would find these A players and these B plus players for healthcare positions.
Mm. Do you often find yourself overwhelmed by the influx of client calls you receive? Receptionists are expensive, but you can't afford to let your patients go to voicemail. You care for your clients, so you try to phone them back, but more often than not, it's too late. They've gone to another practice. When you partner with Well Received, you capture every opportunity. Your calls are answered by professional medical receptionists 24/7, and they can support you with more than just message taking. They offer new patient intake, after-hours service, bilingual services, medical appointment scheduling, medical live chat, and so much more. All this at a fraction of the cost of an in-house receptionist. Your patients are Well Received's priority. As a Practice of the Practice listener, you can get an exclusive 50% off your first 2 months of service. Head on over to wellreceived.com/Joe to start growing your practice today. Now, when people are starting to kind of itemize what they want to outsource, what are some things that you recommend? So what I recommend is usually kind of just starting with a hate list. Like, what do you just hate doing? You're sick of doing? Can you get as much of that off your plate as possible? And then what are the things that are like a bad use of your time. And so, are you still taking out the trash as the owner? Not that
Right.
you're too good for it, but it's like, what are those things that are wasting your time that someone could be better suited to do? How do you help people think through what they need to outsource, what they need to bring in team members for?
There's a story I have from our practice that really um, put a spotlight onto how important this was. We had a team member who was asking me one day why I wasn't washing the dishes in the sink. I would put the dishes into the sink in the break room and I would walk away and ask me, it takes a minute or two to wash those dishes. And I said, yes, it does. I completely agree with you. However, you take a couple minutes before washing the dishes, you take a couple minutes after washing the dishes, and next thing you know, you've got 10, possibly 15 minutes of practice owner time where I'm now doing the arguably the lowest value task in the practice instead of the highest value task in the practice. And I told them as politely as I could possibly do, I said, my time is better spent staring at a wall, um, staring into space, and coming up with ideas that only the practice owner can come up with. And this was a long time ago. That person had a deer in the headlights look, and they didn't last long in that position. This was prior to us hiring for strengths and talents. And so I would just ask your listeners to think, there's so many things in your practice that only you can do. And my guess, Joe, is that an average practice owner very rarely has the time to get to them. And those things that only you can do are incredibly important to your practice. They're things that founders do, that owners do, but they're not generally things that an employee might do.
Yeah. And how do you maintain good culture in that? Because I think sometimes, like, you hear these leadership podcasts and they say, well, leaders, lead from behind or they lead from the front, or they have all these little kind of sayings that they do, like, the leaders do the dishes. How do you think through workplace culture as you're building a team while also understanding that, yeah, doing the dishes, like vacuuming the office, those sorts of things, it would be better spent to grow the practice in a different way. So, like, how do you balance that?
Well, my approach is a little bit different than a lot of folks. I understand the rah rah cheerleading component of this. However, with years of experience in this side of things, it comes down to a bit of a different approach. So, for example, in our practice, we have A plus or A players and we have B players. And in a lot of practices, you have A players, B players, C players, D players. So I'll bring this around to culture in a second, but follow me for a second if you don't mind. The A players on your team only want to work with A players. They will tolerate B players, but they're going to quit their job as soon as you ask them to work with a C player. They will do it without hesitation and with pure abandon because they know they can get another position anytime they want. They're a fantastic employee. So, from a culture standpoint, if you want to dramatically improve your culture, and this is an aggressive idea, but it works extraordinarily well, you have to find a different position for those C players and those D players. Now, sometimes you can just shuffle them around on your team. That's happened in our practice. We had a person who was um, essentially terrible at one role, moved her to a completely different role, and now she's pretty much perfect at it. So that can happen. Other folks simply need to be given the nudge to leave your team and find something they truly enjoy and are outstanding at. So when you do that, what ends up happening is your team members that are the real performers in your practice do extremely well. The B players, they're going to do extremely well, and there really isn't anything lower at a lower level than that. What ends up happening culturally is that there's so many things that those C and D players will bring to the table that are not positive for your culture. It's just the nature of it. So you can try with your magic fly swatter to just swat flies all day long and try and change the culture from essentially bottom up. It just doesn't work, Joe. you will be there all day. What you're doing is playing a very expensive game of whack-a-mole, that amusement park game. The other option, which is more challenging, I think, for some owners up front, is to make those tougher decisions, get um, the C and D players onto another, like some other team, get them different roles, and bring those performers back to the table, the A and B players, and then next thing you know, you're leading from the top down. It's a
Mm.
completely polar opposite approach, but when you do this, you will get results you can't even dream of versus from the bottom up.
Yeah, I think the amount of times that I have hired, whether it was in my practice or with practice to practice, where I hired for budget, I hired for just like quickly getting something off my plate instead of that like well thought out, like who's the best person here,
Right.
to just see where our team is at now, where we have a magnificent COO, we have a magnificent project manager that they know their stuff. They're more expensive than the average virtual assistant, but the amount of time they save and frustration they save, I was still paying for it. It just took twice as long to do some of the things, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So it's amazing how when you start to shift that, um, one thing I struggle with, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So I've heard this phrase, hire slow, fire fast. The therapist in me is like, people can change, they can improve. Maybe we can find a different role for that person. Maybe they need more training or coaching. And sometimes that's worked out well, where someone that I would have given up on now actually is in a better role. And in other times, it's,
Mm-hmm.
man, I should have fired that person 2 years ago.
Right.
How do you think through when someone just isn't a great fit for the role they're in, how quickly to just say fire them, or how quickly you try to get them into something else? How do you think through that?
Well, that is a tricky one. However, remember, I'm approaching this from the standpoint of the team members on my team already have the natural strengths and talents for the position. So that makes it more of a defined problem, if you will. Um, the the first thing I lean towards is to make sure that they have a crystal clear understanding of what's required of them. And then secondarily, do they have the resources they need to do their job? So for example, and this is a silly example, you have your a front desk person or a medical biller or any of those types of positions. And let's say the medical biller, you require that they submit claims electronically. Do they have a computer? Simple question. Now, that's obvious. Of course, they have a computer. Now, think of the non obvious resources that they might require in order to do their job properly. So, here's another example. There was a medical biller who I heard of who did not have, what are they, the HICFA 1500 forms to manually print out claims when that's necessary. She didn't have those. The practice refused to buy them for her. And so in a calendar year, for a $17 or $20 pack of forms, the practice is out, I think, $5,000 or $6,000. Okay.
Mm.
Now that actually happened. Believe it, I was dumbfounded. Not one of our clients. It was through a different means that we found out about this. But boy, oh boy, that biller was looking for a job as fast as possible because she told my practice manager, this is just a great example of the thought process around here. So you took an A player, she was doing terrific, and you just completely handcuffed that person. So that's an example. So you take a look at resources, you take a look at that type of approach. That's how I would kind of drill down into that. And the second thing you mentioned is the hire slow, fire fast. Joe, I am here to tell you that those days are over. We see this throughout North America. How if you're trying to bring on an A player and you're hiring slowly, you will never get an A player. They are on to the next job. They are working for somebody else by the time you get to your third interview with them, that type of thing. And the reason being is that they're looking for decisive leadership in the job that they're trying to or the position they're trying to join. They don't want to work for somebody who can't make a decision, who is mulling things over. Like they're really repelled by the indecisiveness of the hire slowly approach. Now, On the other hand, who's not thrown by that? And that's the C and the D players. If you are asking them to do, let's say, one interview a week for maybe 3 weeks as you're bringing these people back and such, that's okay for them because they don't have much else going on. They're okay with that. And that's really counterproductive to you bringing on high performing team members. So I'd be very cautious about that.
Yeah, I think that idea of, yeah, if someone has the time to be going through like 3 to 5 interviews and like they clearly don't have a whole lot going on. That's a great point. That those
Right.
C and D players oftentimes, can do all those things. Now, as we start to wrap up the interview, as people start to think about their next steps, I think sometimes
Mm-hmm.
when you've gone through grad school and you haven't, been taught a lot about business, or maybe you're in business and you find yourself over your head, or whatever people's situation is, it's hard to see the potential of a practice. I think people going from 0 to 5 clinicians, they're like, that seems reasonable, maybe 10, but really scaling, can be something that people just can't even dream of.
Right.
When you've worked with lots of businesses and in helping them, when we look at scalability, when people start to engage a team, when they start to, hire quicker than maybe they used to, what typically happens at a practice?
So if you're scaling team members up and you're doing so quickly, what we tend to see, the first thing that comes to mind is how are you onboarding them? And in healthcare, onboarding usually means here's the bathroom, best of luck. You got to be very careful with that. We want to make sure that each of these team members is brought on board through a formal onboarding process, um, so that they understand what's required of them, how they can make a terrific contribution, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times in healthcare, that process is skipped. And with what we do, if we see that the onboarding is skipped, a lot of times a person, there's some friction there that is essentially unnecessary. So I would focus on making sure that these people that you brought on are onboarded properly, are treated extremely well from the get go. And what that also does is helps anchor them. It anchors them to your practice so that they can more quickly make a terrific contribution and starting to find out themselves how they, what they're able to do in terms of how they perform, how they are accepted by the practice, their impact on patients, etc. So I would kind of start there, Joe.
So good. Mike, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Great question. I think the biggest thing is that you're just simply not alone. So many times it feels, when you're a practice owner, there's so much coming your way, a bit of a tsunami on any given day. And the main thing is just simply you're not alone. There are ways to bring on these people with the strengths and talents so that they can perform, they can do a terrific job, and take the work that is overwhelming to you off of your plate so you can become, quite simply, Joe, back in control of your life. There's so many practice owners out there, and I was one of them, that was simply out of control. Every single day was that old joke, the tail wags the dog, not the dog wagging the tail. And that's kind of what it felt like. The practice was running my personal life, not me running the practice. So it doesn't have to be that way. We can get those team members on that take the stuff off your plate, and so that you can go back to being the absolute awesome person that you are.
So good. Mike, if people want to connect with Build My Team, if they want to go through your process, tell us a little bit about that and where people can sign up.
You betcha. So you go to www.buildmyteam.com, schedule a consultation on your schedule so you can focus when we're talking to our consultants, and vice versa on their side. And they're going to ask you a bunch of um, very important questions. So I would ask you to be as open and honest as possible, and that will help us determine if we can help you.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thank you so much, Joe.
I still remember when I started outsourcing things within my practice and with our business practice, the practice. And one of the things that was hardest for me was letting go of the things that I enjoyed. I remember every podcast I would do, I would then edit it. I would put the music in there. Sometimes I'd find new music that I could legally use, that I had bought through the channels to do it correctly and all that. Or I would design, images for social media, and every single podcast would take me about 3 hours, which is why I did it once a week. But when I switched and built out a team, and especially those early choices to have a sound engineer and to have someone doing the social media, I could show up, I could do the interview, and then I was done. That's how we can scale to do 6 to 7 of these a week. Because I show up, I do the interviews, hand it off to the team, make notes on it, all that. So that's true in your practice too. So start thinking about first those things that you hate doing. Put those on a list, and then think about those things that you really should stop doing. If you're still doing your own bookkeeping, you're not a bookkeeper, you're a therapist. If you are doing your billing, engage a biller. Start doing those things like what Mike said so that you can focus in on what the owner should be doing. Also, we couldn't do the show without our sponsors. Well Received is our sponsor today, and it actually just lined up great. Receptionists can be really expensive, and they specialize in helping you get every single phone call to your practice answered with 24/7 medical receptionists. They do new patient intakes, after-hours billing, services, medical appointments, all of that at the fraction of a cost of having someone in-house. You can get 50% off your first 3 months. Head on over to wellreceived.com/Joe. Again, that's wellreceived.com/Joe, and you'll get 50% off your first 3 months. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.